Hello everyone, welcome to ProAV. Exciting one today. This is our first ever Nikon stream. I'm joined by Bruno from Nikon. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm really, really good. Really excited to be here. I mean, obviously it's a start of a beautiful relationship and definitely fun to be invited. So thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to come down and talk to us. I'm not going to lie, ProAV and certainly myself are fairly new to the world of Nikon. You know, we've been selling them now for a good few months. My career so far, I've not had a huge amount of hands-on experience with Nikon, which is a real shame because the more I'm playing with them, the more I'm learning about them, the more excited I'm getting about Nikon. There is so much I did not know about Nikon. So I wanted to kick things off for Nikon on ProAV's YouTube channel by sitting down with you and just having a nice big picture chat. Let's not try and focus on one product. Let's not try and whittle it down. Let's just chat overall about the range for video, because I think it will surprise people just how much we've got going on here. That being said, we do have a new product launch today, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the new toy?
Right, so really, really great, happy coincidence there. We've got the brand new Z5 Mark II. Yeah, which I'm showing here. So it's the entry-level full frame from Nikon, and the beautiful thing about it is that it uses the same processor as the flagship Z9, Z8, Z6 III. So you get a lot of the goodies for a lower price. You know, same autofocus, and you know, most importantly, you get NRAW for £1,600. So
and yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? So this is the new starting point in the lineup for a full frame sensor.
Yes. Yeah. So it replaces the old Z5 essentially.
Gotcha. But that's not, although it's, as you said, a happy accident that this stream is on the same day. If anyone's got any questions about it, fire them over. I don't want to dwell too long on it because I really want to take a bigger picture than that look at the range and the video features. Because it feels a little bit like, as someone who is learning the system, Nikon today, in terms of video features, is very different to Nikon 5, even 10 years ago when I started doing all of this. You know, things have changed a lot recently, right?
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't be further from, there's been a massive transformation, not just with Nikon, I think the whole industry from COVID to where we are now. And I think before COVID, Nikon was very much a photo first company. Yeah. And with the release of the Z mount, I think that changed quite a lot. So in 2018, for those of you who don't know, we went from having one single mount, which was the F mount that we had from 1959 until now, pretty much, which is the DSLR mount. And we've gone over to Z, which is what all of our cameras now have. And with that, not only did we just change the lens mount, we changed the comfort philosophy as well. So for example, all of our Z mount lenses were designed to be hybrid lenses from the get-go. And we've also done, throughout the COVID period as well, the whole company structure has changed. So there's been a lot of restructuring internally. We've actually moved into a really cool new head office in Tokyo. Some factories have been shut, others have opened. So a lot has actually gone in the background as well within the company to see the changes that you're seeing now.
Yeah, and you feel it. You feel it from both big company news that goes out, of course, like the Red acquisition and all the rest of it, but also just in the small picture when you pick up a camera, that there's a lot going on on the video menus. Like there's everything in it, from internal RAW to All-I to H.265 to exposure tools to even features that I hadn't seen on anything else, like the auto capture function and everything. We'll go into a bit more detail on all of those as we go on, but yeah, you really notice these feel not only just as capable as the other brands in the video world, but exceeding things in certain areas as well, which was something, I've got to be brutally honest, I wasn't expecting when I first picked up a Nikon camera for the last few years. There's a lot of exciting stuff.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I think it all boils down to how we actually achieved it. And I think it all starts with Z9 and X-Speed 7. I think that's where it all really starts. You know, I'll put it to you in terms of numbers, right? So going from X-Speed 5, for example, which is what we had with the D850 and D5 and some of our other DSLR cameras, to X-Speed 6, you'd get about 2-3x jump in terms of processing power. And then
So
going from
this is the chip in the camera.
yeah,
the,
this
the
is the
central
processor, exactly. And then going from XP 6, which is the first gen Z6 body, Z7, and things like that, a single XP 6 to an XP 7 is a 10 times difference in terms of processing power. So that's quite a big jump. And so by creating the processor and the platform first and making that really high end, then that allows us to bring it down through the range, essentially, allowing a lot of different features.
Very cool.
So you start with the platform first, and then you jump into each product individually.
Very cool. So where in the conversations that you're having with customers about video for Nikon, have they changed over the last few years? And where is it sitting now? Are you seeing people changing from other brands to Nikon, or are you seeing just an adamant fan base of Nikon that are still using them? Or
it depends on which circles we're talking about, but in some circles, especially at BSC, arguably I was talking to as many customers from other brands as I was talking to Nikon customers. A lot of it comes down that the Z mount is the largest diameter and the shortest flange distance out of all of our kind of hybrid mirrorless competitors. That allows a lot of flexibility when it comes to changing lens mounts. So if you're coming from Sony or a Canon, for example, you can adapt your lenses to Nikon.
I mean, so I've got a little rogue stray on the the very Nikon themed table here. This is a Sony lens, using the Mega adapter on a Nikon Z8, and it's absolutely flawless. The autofocus works fantastically. I've even heard reports that third-party E-mount lenses like Sigma, for example, work better on the Nikon cameras with the adapter than they do on the Sony cameras with E-mount, which is just mind-blowing. But that makes Nikon the only brand that you can, if you've invested in Sony E-mount lenses, this is the only brand that you can go to and still use those lenses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Nikon's mentality for not just the cameras, but the mount itself has been very much create the platform first, and then you can worry about all the other bits, rather than having to release a feature and then catch up on the platform side. What I mean by that is, for example, we went with the F mount, which was actually one of the smaller mounts. And it had one of the longest flange distances of most other brands, which makes it so, yes, you can put F-mount lenses on anything, but trying to put other brands' lenses and trying to do something with the F-mount cameras was very difficult.
So you went for the exact opposite approach.
We went for the exact opposite, exactly. So we thought, you know what, we've had this restriction for a few years, so with the Z-mount, let's make it the very best that we can. And keep in mind, the adaptability is actually second. Right. So what we're thinking when we're doing such a large diameter and a short flange distance is actually image quality that comes with the lenses, because it allows us to get light right at the corners. Right. It makes it really easy to explore different optical designs, for example. So there's a lot of really cool lenses that we can only make because we have a mount like that. A good example of that is the 58mm 095 Noct lens.
The infamous Noct. Yes.
Absolutely. That lens was designed to really explore what the Z mount can do. What I mean by that is, a lot of other brands have 0.95 lenses. It's not a new thing necessarily to Nikon. But what makes that lens unique is that you can do it and still have the corners be sharp.
Yes.
I think that's the idea.
Which means you can actually use 0.95. You can actually use
0.95. It makes it incredibly useful. So that is one lens where you can see the optical quality that comes from Z mount. 35-1.2, which we've got here, is also another example as well of the optical quality that you can get from...
That's pretty new, right? That's just been launched.
Yeah. Came out very, very recently.
So as we chat, by the way, people watching, if you have any questions that you want, I'm more than happy to steer this any direction that you want. So if you've got any questions, let me know. I can bring them up at any point in the chat, and I'm happy to steer the conversation as we go. Bruno, is there any other, I mean, we talked about the lens adapters, but is there any other things that spring up time and time again when customers are changing from one or other brand?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, have you got 3 hours, right? there's a lot of things that we have conversations about. I think the main thing that are attracting other customers to Nikon is how much we've adapted RAW as a format. Right. So for stills, it's been the common format for years, right? You have the JPEGs and you have the RAW for stills. But when it comes to video, the industry is obviously, the file sizes are bigger and more difficult to work with. We know all that, but the industry is almost been a little bit averse to using RAW as a primary format in their cameras, whereas we're putting it in as many places as we can, effectively. We've got it on the Z9, on the Z8, on the Z6 III. We now also launched the Z5 II with RAW to an SD card as well. So it's something that we're definitely pushing as a company, because we want that to be a standard going forward. We want RAW video to be accessible to people as much as it is for stills. And, you know, if you're using multiple cameras from other brands and you have one that does RAW, suddenly you can then match a color a little bit easier. So if you're working with, you know, 3 different cameras at the same time, you shoot log on 2 of them, you can actually use a log curve of a different camera on top of the raw signal on the Nikons, and you can kind of match,
which you're doing with Red, right?
Yes. Yeah, so you can actually match that to other competitor cameras as well. On the note of Red, we've also released the creative LUTs for which are something that Reds has had for a number of years on their cameras, and the same LUTs are now able to be used for Nikon cameras as well. So that essentially means the Red engineers have worked on it and designed it to make sure that the colors are as close as possible with the Red cameras. It won't be exactly the same, but it definitely brings it to a place where you can match them much easier.
Okay, we can use both of them as a pair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. And so does the RAW format come in different flavors and different sort of compression levels?
Yeah. So that's the thing. So even for people that don't want to shoot RAW, we've got loads of options, right? So I'm going to talk about the Z9, the Z8, and the Z6 III when I say this, just because some of the other cameras will have slightly different codecs and things like that. But those 3 cameras will have exactly the same. So you've got Nikon NRAW, which is as of today. There was an official announcement today as well that Premiere Pro will support Nikon NRAW going forward.
Excellent.
The reason why that has happened is because Nikon NRAW has been integrated into the Red software development kit, which gets sent out to all of the NLEs. And that allows it to be a little bit easier on Adobe's part to integrate NRAW into their workflow. You can also use it on the Red Cine X software as well, so you can transcode RAW footage on there. But effectively, you've got Nikon NRAW, which is a 12-bit compressed RAW format. You've also got ProRes RAW on those 3 cameras.
So you get ProRes RAW.
Yeah,
so there's 2 different
Yes, you get 2 flavors of RAW. If you don't want to shoot RAW, you've got ProRes 422 HQ, which is just your standard ProRes files. However, I wouldn't actually recommend people use ProRes 422 because the file sizes of NRAW are actually smaller, and you get a RAW format. So you might as well go for the NRAW. When you shoot NRAW, you also get a proxy file as well.
Okay.
One thing that I want to mention is the proxy file is done automatically. So there is no function inside the camera to turn it on or off. You just shoot and it does it.
And it's called the exact same thing?
Yes, it's called the same thing. One would be like an MP4 1080p file, essentially. And they'll both go to the same card. So just one thing I want to mention there as well. But yeah, so you get ProRes 422 HQ built into that as well. And then you get H.265 10-bit and log standard. You can do H.264 as well, 8-bit. But the 10-bit formats are H.265 and above.
Okay. Yeah. Which is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, the modern computers and M1 chips on Macs and all the rest of it above handle H.265 amazingly well. And if it doesn't happen to work for you, you've got ProRes in the camera.
Exactly.
And RAW, of course.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so the formats, is that the thing that comes up in conversation?
Yes, quite a lot.
Most?
Quite a lot, because it's so flexible.
And that's the biggest fleet. I mean, Sony is notoriously now quite limited, actually, compared to a lot of the other brands in terms of the codec choices that they give you. I mean, it's H.264 in all I or long op, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
You know, Canon gives you ProRes, not ProRes, gives you RAW and H.265 and H.264, but not the ProRes stuff. Panasonic do, but not the RAW. If they do, it's the ProRes RAW on some of their models. So that across, and that's pretty much, that's not just 1 or 2 cameras.
No, there's the 3 most popular cameras. We do have, the reason I wanted to leave out some of the other cameras is, for example, the Z5 Mark II does NRAW, but it doesn't have any ProRes. Right, so it doesn't have ProRes HQ and it doesn't have ProRes RAW, but it does do NRAW. Yeah. But the 3 most popular cameras, which is Z9, Z8, and Z6 III, they will have the full suite of flavors. Exactly the same. So there's no disadvantage going with a Z6 III over a Z9, for example, if you just want to record 4K RAW. Right? Yeah. It's really nice that we're able to put that in that many cameras. Yeah, and one thing I want to mention as well is that there's no licenses, so you don't have to pay for any of this. Yeah. You don't need to hook up an external recorder. It's just built into the camera as is. And the thing I want to highlight is by having it done internally and not to an external recorder, it also means that you get fully weather sealed setup. You don't have to have a cable coming out. You don't have to open up the rubber port.
The weather sealing super. I mean, we often
huge.
talk about physical knocks and all the rest of it having physical cables, but the weather sealing is just as much of a big thing.
Absolutely. One thing that we were talking about earlier as well is these don't have fans, and I think some people see that as a negative. I see it as a positive because they won't need fans. Right? A lot of testing has been done on these for recording for long periods of time without overheating, and being able to have that in a completely weather sealed unit, being able to still shoot at those really high resolutions and frame rates and codecs and things like that makes it for a very compelling, filmmaker camera for wildlife, for example.
Oh, absolutely. So is that the same across the board? They don't really have any overheating? Pretty much. So the Z9 is the camera that I've tried to get it to overheat and I couldn't. I don't know what the overheating symbol looks like on the camera because I've never seen it. I own one myself. I absolutely love it. The Z8 is the same spec but in a smaller body. One thing I would say with the Z8 is that the camera doesn't tend to overheat by itself, but depending on which card you go for, if the card has better thermals than others, then you just have to watch out on the hot card warning is what it does. It has a separate warning that is a hot card warning.
Yes, hot card warning. So it's not the camera overheating. It just detects when the card is running at above a certain temperature, and then it gives you the warning. It doesn't typically shut off. So if you get the warning, don't worry about it. But it's still something to bear in mind. With the Z8, I would look for cards that have better thermals. When you get really good cards with really good thermals, you shouldn't need to worry about overheating.
How interesting. And is there a record time limits in any of them?
Yes. So on Z8, Z9, Z8, and Z6 III is 2 hours and 5 minutes.
Okay. Just across every format. It's just
because there's one thing I was talking about earlier is a platform, right? So we developed the XP7 platform, and then usually the features and limitations tend to carry over to different models. There are slight differences between them, which we can very happy to explore, but they're actually very similar. Between them in a lot of ways. If you look at the menu system, you'd think it's the same camera. They're very, very, very similar, which means Z6 III is fantastic value, right?
Absolutely. And if you need multiple, you can have a Z9 and a Z6 III as A cam, B cam,
and they work so well together, really well. It's designed as one cohesive package here. In fact, I've got all the XP7 models here.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got a couple of questions have come in. Cedric Photography is saying, is there any workflow for the Nikon Z6 and the Atomos Ninja 5 with the updated RAW? So we haven't talked about external RAW at all. You talk about not really needing it with these, but I guess the Z6 being an older camera.
Yeah, it's funny actually because we've gone 180 on that, right? So on the Z6 Mark 1 and Mark 2, the way to get the best video out of them was externally.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so you had, especially on the Z6 II, you had actually two types of RAW that you could do. You could do ProRes RAW to an Atomos Ninja 5 or Blackmagic RAW to a Blackmagic video system. Right, so you could choose that individually, and then we also had back then. This is talking about 2018. We had an essential movie kit, which kind of gave you all you needed to make that work with the Ninja 5 and things like that. So there hasn't really been, since the Z9 and Z8 and all this kind of stuff, there hasn't really been any major updates for those older cameras, just because the platform and the processing is very different. As I said when we started the podcast, there's about a 10 times processing difference between XP7 on a Z6 III versus XP6 on a Z6, essentially. So there is a limit to what we can achieve with those cameras.
Absolutely. Ken has also asked, do you think that since Nikon acquired Red, that other cameras will experiment with compressed internal RAW? I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it, with the whole Red acquisition?
Yeah. But is the question relating to other brands?
I guess
or
other brands.
Nikon?
Yeah, I mean, Nikon has it now. But interestingly, Nikon had it before acquiring Red as well.
Yeah.
I guess nothing can be said really on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different factors that play into that. Some people say it's a patent issue. Some people say just brands don't want to do it. That there's so many ways you could answer that question. To be fair, there is no definitive decision. It's a question you'd have to ask other brands. To be fair,
and also a lot of brands are doing it. I mean, Panasonic have got it now. ProRes RAW, Canon have got it. Blackmagic have got it. Sony don't, below the Bruno, as we mentioned. Don't think Fuji do off the top of my head. But the vast majority of brands now have some form in some way. Thing, but having a full suite of all the options is I think pretty unusual for Nikon. Fishing Real Pictures has just put in, are there any plans to introduce false color in the Z6 Mark III/Z8? So there isn't false color at the moment.
No.
Should we go over what exposure tools there are, and have you had people asking for false color?
Yeah, no, of course. We get a lot of feedback, and we do tend to feed it back. And to be fair, a lot of people were asking with... sorry, I had a drink there. My throat went there for a minute. With shutter angle was one that a lot of people are asking for, and eventually made its way onto the cameras via firmware. So never say never is the answer to that question. But we do tend to feed it back, and if it's something that the engineering team thinks is possible, of course, we want to add as many things as possible. Whether that will be or not added, only time will tell. When it comes to features that we have in the cameras at the moment, we've got waveforms and histograms, and you can and zebras as well. So you can choose between histogram and waveform, which one you want at the same time. Unfortunately, not both.
Gotcha.
You can change the size of the waveform as well, and you can have zebras, and you can change the threshold and different things on the zebras as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Very cool. So let's go through some of the brand, because one of the areas that I struggled the most with when I was trying to learn Nikon was the lenses. Nikon is famous for doing lenses and doing lenses well, but there is a lot of lenses.
Yes.
There
We're
is
really
a
happy.
lot.
We've done it really quickly.
So let's go over how do you recommend people who are new to Nikon to sort of decipher the lens lineup?
We've tried to simplify things a little bit compared to the F mount. So back in the F mount days when we had DSLRs, the actual lens naming itself was actually quite long. So you'd have something like AFS, G, VR, ED, IF. You had all of these things. So the naming structure would get quite long. Everything means something. But we found that people would prefer something a little bit more simplified. So with the Z system, if you look at it here, I've got an 85mm 1.2 in my hand. It literally just says 85-1.2, right? It does what it says on the tin, right? The way I'd look at it is I would actually put all of Nikon lenses into 3 pots.
Okay.
Right? So you've got the lower end budget type of lenses, think of your kit lenses, like your 16-50 DX or... I'd put that in a slightly different category, actually. But you've got your 24DX, which is that one there. There we go. I'll put that.
Picked up the wrong small lens.
Yeah, so you've got your budget-friendly lenses, your standard kit lenses like 16-50, 50-250, 24-50, that kind of stuff. Then you have the S line, which is your really premium, high-end, your 24-70 2.8, your 85 1.2s.
So that's your pro.
That's your pro, your premium. And then you have kind of a really nice thing that I don't see too many other brands doing. I think some of them have started to, is to have a really competitive middle ground, right, of lenses that aren't classified as S-line, but they would have been pro lenses years ago, but for a really, really good price. In that category, I'll give you an example, right? So we have the Holy Trinity, as we call, 14-24 2.8 S-line. Then we have a 24-70 2.8 S-line, 70-200 2.8 S-line. Gotcha. That is your Holy Trinity of your main 3 zooms.
Every photographer owns
exactly
those. We
actually have another Holy Trinity, which is actually at lower priced, right? But it still maintains the 2.8. So you've got the 17-28 f2.8, we've got the 28-75 f2.8, and we've got a 70-180 f2.8 as well. And all of those are about half as expensive as the S-line variants. Right. So that gives people a really nice middle ground. You're not going for the cheapest lenses. You're getting really good glass for a really good price without having to spend more money for the pro variants.
For the best,
if that makes sense.
Get. So what do you lose? Is it sharpness?
A few things, of course. So one of the things I want to mention with S-line is to be an S-line lens, there's a few criteria. Right. So one of the criteria that they use is that the lens must be as sharp as possible, wide open. Right. So the idea is that, if you take a 1.2 lens, it's designed to be tack sharp at 1.2. You don't need to step it down. That's the idea. Right. You don't need to step it down to f2. You don't need to step it down to f4. You get as sharp of a lens at f4 as 1.2. That is the goal. That is the idea. Sometimes it's more possible than others. Some lenses can achieve that. Other lenses perhaps will achieve something close, but that is always the end goal, right?
Yep.
Also, focus breathing. So when it comes to S-line lenses, they all do a really, really good job with focus breathing. Some of them have close to zero, some of them have a little bit more, but the idea is to always reduce focus breathing as much as possible on the S-line lenses.
Okay, I didn't realize that. That's very relevant for video work.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you look at the size and weight of some of the 1.2 lenses, a lot of people look at them and think, oh, they're a little bit bigger, but actually they are tack sharp at 1.2 with minimum focus breathing compared to other 1.2s in the market. So that makes them fairly unique in what they do. And also another thing as well is very few software corrections. Right, so a lot of other brands and other lenses, they usually have a combination of software corrections and optical corrections, where with S-line lenses the goal is to have everything done in lens, essentially optically speaking, so that you just, when you shoot RAW, for example, you get the raw file with the lens corrected optically as it was intended to be used. So that is the goal for S-line lenses, right? Ultimate quality, sharp, wide open, minimum focus breathing.
Gotcha.
So when it comes to, for example, then we have, say with 35, for example, we've got a 35 1.2 S-line, then we have a 35 1.8 S-line, and then we have a 35 1.4, which is not an S-line lens, right? So that's a really interesting scenario, because typically...
So the f1.4 is not S-line, but the f1.8 is.
Exactly, right? So the way that works is the 1.8 is designed to be tack sharp at 1.8, use that wide open, very clinical, very sharp, optically very, very well corrected. But when we had the 1.8 and then we had, 51.2 and 85 1.2, a lot of people were asking, actually, we want a little bit more of that character back. These are almost like too good, right? They're too sharp, they're too clinical, they're too corrected. You don't get as much flaring with them. So a lot of people are asking, we want a little bit more character out of our lenses. So what we've done is we released the 35 1.4 and a 50mm 1.4, which are both lenses that are actually the same price and size as the 1.8 variants, but they don't have to meet flary requirements and sharpness requirements to be an S-line lens. They're still plenty sharp. When you use them on 1.4, they're going to be sharp enough, but they'll give you a little bit more character. Right?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which is really nice. And again, very well corrected for focus breathing. And because they are a newer generation of lenses, they actually get a specific control ring on those that you don't actually get with the original 1.8 S-line lenses, because those lenses came out in 2018, whereas the 1.4 lenses, they're more modern. So they now come in with that the extra control ring that you didn't have originally.
Gotcha. Okay. And then there's the new kid on the block, the video lens.
28 to 135, absolutely fantastic lens. It's definitely a marker for us, stepping into the pro video market. I mean,
it absolutely is. There is not many brands with a lens like this on the market. It's a 28 to 135 millimeter f4 with power zoom and image stabilization in it, and it is just a rock solid documentary workhorse video lens.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the key goals for that lens is, one, it needs to work seamlessly with the cameras. It also needs to be completely rugged and weather sealed, and it needs to fit into a production workflow. And those are all very difficult things to do in a lens when you're trying to make it very lightweight as well. Right. So it's a really interesting lens, right? Because I'll give you an example. So it's designed for documentary run and gun, but it also has to work really well for gimbal use, right? So it was a lens that was designed to have a almost perfect weight ratio. So when you zoom in the lens all the way up to 135 and then back to 28, the weight only shifts by 2 millimeters each way.
Wow.
Right. So the weight is dead center in the tripod foot.
More than
almost
little
nothing
that a gimbal can easily compensate.
Exactly.
For that in its sleep.
So the idea is that you have a lens that doesn't shift the weight, makes balancing on the gimbal much easier, because you don't have to worry about rebalancing every time you want to zoom in. Also, which brings me to my next thing, which it pairs really nicely with the MC-N10. So imagine this, and I wish we had a graphic to illustrate this or a picture, but essentially got a Z8 or a Z9 on a gimbal, say like a DJI Ronin or something like that. You can actually put this with like a NATO adapter or something on the side, and you could hold the gimbal on your left hand, and on the right hand you could be zooming in and out using the buttons on the MC-N10. So
this remote MC-N10 is it's just a USB-C.
Yeah, standard USB-C controller, plugs in there. It takes 2 AA batteries for power, but they will literally last months. Last time I put these batteries in here was last year. Wow. So it will last you a very, very long time. You can use the joystick to zoom in as well.
And it's just kind of all the controls that are on the side of a camera replicated.
It's the exact same number of controls on the right side of the camera replicated. Is exactly what you said. But it does give you the standard ARRI rosette adapter on there, and then you can mount this on anything. You can use a very long USB-C cable. So you're not limited to using like a 1 meter or something. I've tried this with a 5 meter. It works just fine.
And so you could put that just on the end of your tripod pan bar. You could put it on a shoulder grip for doing handheld. You could put it on your gimbal.
But if you want to use it on the power zoom,
on a jib,
literally just use the joystick to power zoom the lens. That's it, and you can be anywhere. I gave the gimbal example because usually if you're using a small gimbal as a solo operator, you might not have where to actually change the settings and things like that. Left hand on the gimbal, right hand on the grip, and then you can zoom in and out. You can also use the joystick to create a small focus area and jump between eyes. So if you have two different people in the frame, one is at the back and one is at the front, you can actually focus pull using the joystick, which is really, really convenient.
And this works with any of the cameras?
Yes, so the MC-N10 works across the entire range, and even with slightly older cameras. So it works with Z6 II, Z7 II, and all that stuff.
It's just one of those things that I don't know why the other brands haven't done that. Like that makes so much sense. So much sense. That makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
So yeah, for a gimbal setup, a Z8 or a Z6 Mark III, probably Z6 Mark III with its fast sensor on it.
Yeah, I would probably say one thing I want to mention as well is the Z8 was actually designed to work with this specifically. And the reason why I say this is because the Z8 has 2 USB ports. So that allows you to use this and power the camera at the same time. Whereas with a Z9 or a Z6 III, you've got to choose whether you're transferring data or power, but not both with the MC-N10.
Gotcha.
Right.
So you could power the Z8 from the gimbal and have it all as just a self-contained, all just running off one of those DJI batteries.
Exactly.
With a big,
that's
with
the
a
idea.
28 to 135 power zoom.
Yeah, that's the idea. But also the power zoom. So that was one thing, being able to use it with gimbals, making it lightweight. Was really nice, but also how do we integrate it into production, right? So it's actually got a 0.8 gear pitch on the focus, so you can use it with traditional follow focus systems if you want to. It is a fly-by-wire lens, so you're not going to get hard stops, but all of the modern systems you can add the hard stops manually anyway. By just creating a beginning point and an end point. So that's totally usable. And that way, what it allows it to do is you can have a first AC pulling focus. But if something happens and you quickly want to engage autofocus, you can override it with a button. And then you can go back to manual focus. So you can be operating, in a documentary environment. You can work with the first AC, but then override with autofocus at any given point.
Absolutely.
And that works seamlessly. So you don't have to change from autofocus to manual focus. You can be in autofocus, and then as soon as he begins to turn the focus, it's in manual. Press the button, you're back in auto.
It's amazing for gimbal work.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
So it's a very flexible lens.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll break down some of the cameras in a second. Let's go through some of the questions that have just come in. Andrew is again asking about some older cameras. Andrew's saying, could a firmware upgrade remove the 30-minute recording limit on older Z cameras? Here is a Z6 and a Z6 Mark II.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. So yes and no. I don't know the engineering behind it, I'll be honest. Whether that is possible or not, only time will tell. Yeah. Nikon typically doesn't comment on upcoming firmware or product releases, so it's not something that we can answer at this time. Definitely something we can always feedback.
Another thing to feedback from Eugene has just put a very interesting comment. Please make the MC-N10 rotary controls mappable to high-res zoom, which is an interesting one. So I guess applying a little bit of a digital zoom to it.
Yeah. High-res zoom does work on the buttons. So with which one thing is good to touch on as well. So when you're using the power zoom lens, so 28 to 135, you can actually use that in conjunction with high-res zoom that I just mentioned to achieve a 270 millimeter equivalent focal length in 4K. And you can use them in the sync function. So, for example, it's not like it zooms in, stops, and then goes. It actually starts zooming in together, so it's a seamless transition.
Gotcha.
So you can go from 28 to 270, and you won't know where the power zoom stopped and the digital began. It's all one seamless zoom.
Very, very cool.
And it maintains 4K resolution throughout the whole thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Some bigger picture things. So, Ken and Cedric B Photography have put quite similar comments. Ken for the win says, "Can we expect a Nikon branded cinema camera, or will Nikon stay more towards the hybrid space, leaving red cinema options. And Cedric is saying, is Nikon releasing branded cinema lenses in the future? I guess you could argue this new lens is your first branded cinema lens, right?
Kind of. So let me get into that. So obviously we can't comment on future upcoming releases. That's a given. But actually we have launched this Z Cinema branding, right, together with Red. So the way that the Z Cinema branding works is the power zoom is there alongside the two new Z mount Red cameras, your Komodo X and your V-Raptor X as well. That is one branding together in the Z Cinema. However, the 28-135 power zoom lens, we don't classify that as a cinema lens. It comes under this kind of video cinema umbrella, but that specific lens is not it's not a cinema lens. And the reason why, it's not in T-stops. Also doesn't have hard stops at the focus, so we don't treat it as a cinema lens. Rather, it's a video lens that can be used in high-end productions as well, but it's not necessarily a cinema lens.
Is that leaving space then for cinema lenses?
Potentially. Well, as I said, we have just launched this new branding together with Red. So Z
Gonna do something with it, right? Cool. Okay. So yeah, I sort of get the feeling there's a lot of exciting stuff to come over the next few years, but with what we've got right now, where does this lineup that's in front of you sit? How do you choose between them? I mean, like you said before, and this is something I came up against when learning them.
Yeah.
There's so much that's similar amongst all these cameras, ranging from 1,000 to 5,000 pounds.
Yeah.
You know, how do you differentiate between them? Where do you find customers going for one over the other? How do we break this down?
Yeah, no, it's really difficult actually.
Yeah.
I remember when we had DSLRs, you know, someone would come in and say, "Oh, I want to do wildlife." You'd point them, yeah, definitely go for a D850.
That's your wildlife.
You want to do your weddings and things like that. You want to go for a D750, and it was pretty easy to recommend things to people. Now, not so much. Because now they all use the same platform, right? They all use the same menu structure. So, for example, on a Z52, which is one of our entry-level cameras, it has a network menu very, very similar to the Z9's network menu, which is something that usually, you know, it's got FTP capabilities, for example, on the entry level. Where before that was something that was only restricted to the high-end $5,000 plus Pro models. So it's definitely something where we've taken the menu system and the structure and we've essentially copied and pasted it throughout the entire range, which makes it fantastic value for money looking at cameras like a Z6 III, like a Z5 II, like a Z8, you know, that you do get a lot of bang for your buck. But there are still some differences that are worth talking about. I mean, starting with the Z9 and Z8, one thing I want to mention is internally there is no difference, right? I'll start there. So that's one thing I usually have to drill into people's heads, is because people always think, but there's a catch, right? And there isn't. There's the same processor, the same sensor, same viewfinder, same screen. You know, they're very, very similar cameras. But what you're going to get with a Z9 is you get like a lockable door with two CF Express cards on there. Whereas on the Z8, you've got one CF Express Type B, and then you've got one SD card on there as well. So battery is different. So the battery on the Z9 will last you 2.5 times as much as the battery on the Z8, which is much smaller. What that means is even if you use a battery grip, the battery expectancy of a Z9 is still higher, right? Even if you put the Z8 with a battery grip, 2 batteries in there, you should still get a little bit more power from a Z9, right? So those are advantages and reasons to get a Z9.
Half a smaller battery's worth.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get things like an Ethernet port on the Z9, which is really handy. You get GPS built in. You get things like a Kensington lock on the side, so you can physically lock the camera into position. A good example of how this is used is if you look at the Olympics and you see all the pictures of the swimmers taken from above, they usually have one of these up there, essentially. And you don't want that to fall on the swimmer's head.
That would be embarrassing.
That would be embarrassing. So that's why we have things like a Kensington lock. They're very specific things. The people that need them really do need them, and that's why we make it. But for most people...
But for video, really, you know, we're often leaving our cameras in some quite... dangerous positions, hanging them off a boat, putting them on a car rig, all that kind of stuff. So it's worth knowing.
Absolutely. And also all of our telephoto lenses, all of our S-line telephoto lenses, I should mention, also have the same thing. So if you look at it on here, it's actually hidden very cleverly under that.
Okay.
You just peel that and you also get a Kensington lock on the lens.
I did not
So
know that.
you lock it once on the lens, once on the body, and off you go. You don't need to tie in loads of different cables and you know things around it. It just makes life a little bit easier to work with in terms of security.
Very cool. So that's the Z8, Z9. Both got IBIS?
Yeah, they both have IBIS. They both have the same unit inside, have the same processor, same sensor and everything. They both were some of the first cameras in the market, actually, to get rid of the shutter altogether. So they were Nikon's first stacked sensor cameras, which we believed were so fast that it didn't require a mechanical shutter. So what we've done is we've taken the shutter away and we've replaced it with a sensor shield, as you can see there. So
yes, okay, so we've seen this on other cameras from other brands where the shutter comes down in front of the sensor to shield it when there isn't a lens attached. So that's not what's going on here.
No. So that's one thing that you mentioned as well. So this is not a shutter. Let's just start there. It's a dedicated shield made from different materials. I can touch it.
Yeah, that makes me so nervous.
I can touch it. In fact, I had someone put their thumb on, they grabbed the camera off the table like this, and they pressed their thumb against the shield, and they actually uncoupled the shield from the little couple there, and then it just kind of sat there limp. I just took my fingers and clicked it back in. It's that durable. It's never been in a situation where you think, oh, that's going to break. It's absolutely fine. It doesn't impact the camera's function whatsoever.
Which is really cool because, you know, it's a great idea to protect the sensor when the lens isn't on in a dust environment or anything like that. Just generally at home in the office, it could be a dusty environment sometimes.
Yeah. And you don't want the camera's most fragile part exposed.
To be the one
be the one protecting it. Because I'd much rather get dust in the sensor than on the shield. Sorry, than on the shutter. Because the shutter is a very expensive replacement.
And also the shutter waves about all over the place. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
You know, exactly. So if the dust is on the shutter, it's gonna go all over the place.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Definitely. So again, these are completely shutterless cameras. You can change the sound of the shutter. So if you're doing stills, for example, and you still want a reassuring sound, there are multiple sounds you can choose and different volumes as well that you can use on a Z8 and Z9 for sure. Brings me to the Z6 III. Because these two, 45 megapixel stacked sensor cameras, 8K 60 RAW, we know all that stuff, right?
Yep.
Z6 III is where things start to get a little bit different, right? Because here is where we actually change hardware, right, for the first time compared to these guys. So it uses the same processor as a Z8 and Z9, so it's capable of doing all of the same things. So, right, in terms of autofocus algorithms and shooting rates for stills and things like that, it's exactly the same. Right. So there's 20 frames a second in RAW, 120 in JPEG, exactly the same as the Z8 and Z9.
Right.
Where it starts to get different is hardware. So if you look at it, the viewfinder is actually substantially different compared to the ones on the Z8 and Z9. And I wish you guys watching at home could experience this for yourself. It's the brightest EVF in the market, essentially. So it's a 4000 net EVF, extremely bright. I do tend to blind people when I show them. You can even see there off your eye the reflection.
Can you?
Very, very good.
Very bright.
Yeah. So that's a significant upgrade. A lot of people ask me, why would you need the viewfinder to be that bright?
Yeah.
Simple situation. If it's a sunny day, I know we don't get many of them in the UK, but if you're in a very bright and sunny environment, shooting in a desert, or maybe you're shooting in snow where you have the sun reflecting off snow, that's when you want a really bright viewfinder. It's actually the other way around. When it's dark, you don't want the viewfinder that bright. Otherwise, your eyes are just going to be all over the place.
Presumably, you can dial that right up.
It's automatic, actually. Okay. So by default, when you pick up the camera, it's actually automatic. So whatever the ambient light is, the camera is going to react to that. I just like to manually crank it up to show people, but you can absolutely leave it on auto, and it's not going to get to the maximum level until it thinks it needs it, essentially.
Does it affect battery life much?
If you're at the highest, yeah, you would do to a certain degree. I wouldn't have any official figures on that, but there will be an impact because it is a very, very, very bright viewfinder.
Yeah,
it is also P3 calibrated as well in terms of color, so it's very, very nicely done. Viewfinder 5.7 million dots as well, so it's higher resolution compared to a Z8 and Z9. So really, really beautiful viewfinder. It also gets the flip screen. So you get the fully articulating display as well, which is different. So on the Z8 and Z9, for example, you have a screen
multi-angle
that tilts
thing
up, tilts down, and you can also tilt around as well.
Oh yes, I see. It doesn't flip out.
So you can do that essentially, right? Which is really nice. So Z6 III gets you the fully articulating display as well. The Z6 III also gets you improved IBIS system. So it's 7.5 stops of IBIS in terms compared to a Z8 and Z9, which are about 5.5 stops of of IBIS. So it's a really, really good system. Same as the ZF, actually, that was where we introduced this system. It also gets ProRes at higher resolution. So for example, with the Z8 and Z9, you can't do ProRes in 8K. Whereas this one, you can do ProRes at the highest resolution, which is 6K of the camera. So that is a nice little improvement on there as well. On the Z6 III, it's also a 24 megapixel sensor. So again, if you're the type of person working with very, very high ISOs, you might actually prefer the files coming out of the Z6 III in terms of noise performance. And the most important thing that I wanted to leave for last is actually the sensor design is different. So this is a fully stacked sensor camera, whereas the Z6 III is a partially stacked sensor. I wanted to leave this for last because it's the only camera that offers that partially stacking. So a lot of people will ask me, what is a partially stacked sensor? It essentially means you're taking the same kind of circuitry that you find on a stacked sensor, and you put it at the top and you put it at the bottom, and you leave a line across the middle without the stacking. You do it for cost-saving reasons, essentially giving you a much needed speed bump, right, without necessarily making the cost as much as a Z8 or Z9, right? It's a really nice compromise of getting the additional boost without having to spend an extra £1,000 on the camera. But it still gets you 6K 60p RAW, for example, 4K 120 RAW, still gets you 20 frames a second in RAW for stills. The rolling shutter is minimal compared to other cameras on the market. If you compare it to the Z6 II, for example, it's a much, much faster camera in every single regard. And a lot of it comes from not only having the newer sensor, the newer processor, but also having that partially stacked sensor. And you can see a difference. I mean, the Z5 Mark II has got a conventional sensor with that processor, and it's capped out at 4K for the RAW, whereas this is 6K 60, and you get less rolling shutter as well. So you can see where the stacking of the sensor really does make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, 6K ProRes from a video side is pretty impressive, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I don't know anything else really that can do 6K.
Yeah.
Even the highest end cinema cameras, when they're doing their ProRes internally, is normally at 4K.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of things that we looked into this camera to make it more appealing to kind of higher end users as well. So when we brought the camera out, it didn't have shutter angle. That's something that we brought out recently via firmware update, which is really nice, and as part of that feedback. So again, we've got obviously people on the chat feeding back. We do listen. We do tend to feed it back to Nikon Japan, and hopefully they will integrate it into cameras. And this has come as part of direct feedback. People wanted shutter angles, so we added it via firmware. Not just that, I mean, full-size HDMI, for example, on these guys. You get, very, very extended times of shooting without overheating on the Z6 III, which is fantastic. 6K 60p NRAW. As of today as well, NRAW has been announced that it will be supported by Premiere Pro, which is huge, which is also makes the camera even more powerful. But of course, you've got ProRes RAW as an option, or just regular ProRes HQ.
Remarkable. So if you were advising a customer on which models to choose for video, it would be those three as the starting point.
Yeah, I'd say if you're working with high-end production, or are you filming a documentary in the middle of the Amazon rainforest or Arctic Circle, really punishing conditions, I'd go for the 9.
Yep.
The Z9 is the camera you want with you if you are in a place with no electricity for days, or heavy rain or heavy snow and things like that. In fact, it's the camera of choice of NASA for their in space missions. So it's if it's good enough for NASA, it's good enough for me. Is that
amazing video I've seen of them changing a lens in zero gravity? That's a Z9.
Yeah, that's a Z9. Exactly. So that's the camera you want when the going gets tough, right? Is the Z9. And also as well, if you're going to put it on, we have a P2Z system called the SR1. And if you want that to work via Ethernet, that's got the Ethernet port on there. Like, it just has a few facilities that just make life a little bit easier for these kind of pro end users. Z8 is kind of what you want. If you want the spec of the 9, but you don't want the size and the bulk, maybe you want to pop it on a gimbal. Maybe you're doing a short film and you just want a smaller kit, or you're filming a documentary and you don't want to carry loads of stuff around. Z8 is what you want for the smaller camera. Z6 III for anything to do with low light. to be fair. The second native ISO was 6400 on that, and get very, very good levels of noise with that. So I'd probably pick the Z6 III for anything where you're working at night or you need a little bit more flexibility in that regard.
Wildlife would be good.
Yeah.
Do any of them have pre-roll for the slow motion?
No, not pre-roll. We have that in stills, but not that for video. Yeah.
Okay, that would be amazing. But I know very few people have that.
Yeah.
But they do just thinking about wildlife, that pre-capture feature that you showed me before, it would be incredible. Should we just explain that quickly?
Do you auto capture or pre-capture? Because we have
auto capture.
Auto capture.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. I'm meaning auto capture.
Yes. So pre-release capture is what we call is the stills function of pre-roll.
Yes.
Right. So when you can focus and it's pre-buffering the shots before you take it. So that's what we call pre-release capture.
Gotcha.
Auto capture is a really interesting technology, and that's available. That's another point of distinction as well. That's only available on the 9 and 8. It's not available on the 6
it's not on
III.
the 6.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's just one point of distinction I want to make there. So auto capture can be anything you want, right? So you tell the camera to look in a specific direction. And then what happens is up to you. So I'll explain it. So you can tell the camera, for example, when you see a person coming in from the left side between 7 meters and 11 meters, shoot. So when something hits all of those criteria, it shoots. If a bird flies by, it doesn't work. If a car drives by, it doesn't work. If a person comes in at 4 meters, it won't fire. But if a person comes in from the left-hand side between 7 and 11 meters, it will trigger. And the reason I say it like this is because there's so many ways you can configure it. There's hundreds of thousands of combinations that you can put together that it's really up to you how you want to use it. You can trigger it from the right or the left side, up or down.
And so that's effectively using the subject tracking modes in order to, but just in a different way.
Exactly. So the X-Speed 7 has been trained on kind of AI algorithms to detect people, trains, cars, birds, things like that on the cameras. So it's just using that to. And
what amazed me when playing with it was that you haven't just added it as a sort of, oh, we might as well do this because we've got the tech in there feature. You've actually built the UI to make it really usable to use. You can blank out areas of the image by tapping on them and sort of painting onto your image red areas where you don't want it to focus on and all that kind of stuff. Like you've really gone to the effort of making the UI work.
Exactly. So much so that we've actually had a second generation of that come through. Right. So we launched that feature on the Z9, we brought it to the Z8, and then we actually updated that feature again with better UI. With firmware, because I think it's something that a lot of people really enjoyed. If you're a wildlife photographer, for example, and you want to cover it from multiple angles, there's only one of you, right? You can be shooting in a hide. You can actually put your camera somewhere else and tell it when you see a bird shoot.
Yeah.
Right? You can leave it. If you know a bird's going to get to a specific branch on the tree, you can leave the camera pointing at that branch with the settings that you want when it sees a bird shoot. And you could be all the way over there. And you don't need to be there pressing the button. The camera will do it for you. Right, and you can choose how long it would do it for. So it's something that we found.
You could use this in events, things like if you're doing a really low budget sort of automatic booth capture thing, you could have it trigger then as soon as anyone walks into the booth, it triggers a bunch of photos and then they go.
We actually had this running at BSC. I don't know if you saw. So we had an SR1, which is our P2Z head from MRMC, with a Z8 essentially, and we tested it with auto capture, where when people would come to our booth, it would start start shooting. So
you had documentary footage of everyone who came to your booth.
Exactly. No, we didn't have the memory card on that one, so don't worry.
And that also brings on the point that this all works in video as well as.
Absolutely.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's any video codec, so you can be shooting full raw.
Well, what
slow
you do
motion
is it's not the feature is not baked in with any codec. So you first you put the settings of the camera as you would use it normally, and then you go to auto capture and tell it to do it. So it works with everything. There's zero limitation because you set up the camera first, and that is just a way to trigger it.
Yeah, fantastic. Cool. Okay, sorry. That was a segue. So we're going through the lineup. So main ones for video: Z8, Z9, and Z6 Mark III. Yeah. So the ones below that, so not necessarily the older ones like the Z6 Mark II and all the rest of it, but the new Z5 Mark II, the Z50 Mark II, and sort of below.
Yeah.
how do they come into things? Is it sort of not worth looking at those for the video things, or is there, how much gets started to be taken away?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll jump straight. Actually, I'll come back to the Z5 Mark II in a bit, but I'll jump straight to the Z50 Mark II, because I think if you can show what one of the cheapest cameras have, you can only go up from there, right?
Absolutely. So Z50 Mark II is APS-C?
Yes. So it's a crop sensor, APS-C size camera, but at the same time, you get things like a little tiny light on there.
Yeah.
You get a headphone port on the side, so you can monitor. Not all cameras have a headphone port. I think that's worth mentioning, especially not at this price point.
Yeah.
You can use the camera as a webcam via USB-C. So you plug it in there, plug it into a tablet.
UVC, is it?
Yeah. So you can just get stuff straight from there. But ultimately, it works with 10-bit N-Log, same as a Z9. So you can match the footage to a Z9 because it's got the same processor in both cameras, the same log profile in both cameras. So you can match a Z50 to a Z9 with N-Log, and you can use Red Creative LUTs to kind of get you to a starting point on both of those cameras equally. So essentially, you're getting a Z52 with your Red Creative LUT on top. And if you're starting into video, that's a fantastic, really, really powerful combination. You get the same autofocus performance as you do from a 9 in terms of subject tracking and detection. Autofocus full time, which is what we call, works in the same way, whereas it detects a person and it starts tracking them without any human intervention. So that even a Z52, it's already a fantastic camera to kind of get you going with. What you lose with the entry level tend to be the RAW formats and ProRes and things like that. But you'll always have H.265 10-bit N-Log throughout the entire range. So Z50 Mark II, Z5 Mark II, got the ZF as well. So every single camera that we've released since the Z9 has had that built in, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay. So if that's all you need and you're not interested in ProRes or RAW, then you're pretty much going to find the video capabilities in terms of codecs similar across the board.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to mention as well is because everything on this table has the same processor. Right?
Yeah.
So the Z52 has the same processor as the Z9 with a lot of the same functions. Absolutely. So one function that I really like for video, and that makes this a little bit more powerful, is the connect to the cameras function, right? And that works across the board from a Z52 all the way up to a Z9, right? So if you're working with a multicam production, which I've done actually last year, and it worked really, really well, is you can get, let's say you were using all of the cameras on this table. So you had a 9, an 8, a 6.3, a 5.2, and a 50. And you want different angles all working at the same time. You can actually connect all of them to Wi-Fi, right? Have one be the master camera and then have the other ones as the remote cameras. When you trigger the first one, it could be via an MC-N10, all of them will start recording at the same time. And if you put timecode to one, they will all copy the starting timecode, basically.
Very cool.
Yeah. And that's across the entire range.
So they will all copy just on that feature. How accurate is that?
Well, it starts off as extremely accurate. It will start to fade a couple of hours in.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember my testing.
But for very simple.
Oh yeah, for
ordinary corporate interviews.
Yeah. For an hour or 2 hours is fine. Yeah. If you're recording for 3 to 4 hours, then it will start dripping off a little bit.
Sure, but if we're going to do a little backwards and forwards interview chats, with no 20-minute things go on YouTube or whatever, like an ordinary corporate interview, and you had 3 cameras starting that way, you could drag the files onto a timeline just starting at the same endpoint, and they would be in sync.
Yeah, with no external accessories. That's the beautiful thing about it. If you want to, they are compatible with Bluetooth timecode, for example. So you can get accessories to make that work, and you can bring it into kind of pro productions with all the accessories. But the idea of features like this is actually you can just take the camera and go. Yeah. It's the same thing about having RAW internally. You're not having to have an Atomos or a Blackmagic device to make RAW work. The idea is that everything is super simple, ready to go in camera.
There's a massive middle ground there with timecode where you don't need to have a full-blown timecode workflow, and it doesn't need to fit within an existing one and all the rest of it. That all has its place. But you still want simple 1 or 2 camera sync for very small things or YouTube videos or whatever. That's really cool. Again, I haven't seen. I don't think I've seen anyone do that. I sync them to my
phone. So if I'm trying to do like that, I just tell them to look at my phone and use that as a starting time code. Essentially, it's really easy. Just connect your phone to Bluetooth. There's an option that you can take to use your phone's time and date, and use that as your starting point.
Very cool. Eugene has put a couple of things. So, firstly, isn't a question; it's just a point. He says, "What makes the S lenses great for this past Canon fanboy is that they mainly have a linear focus, manual focus workflow. They're also switchable in focus direction, plus they allow variable focus throw. So that's cool. So they're linear. You can choose whether it's a small turn or whether it's a big turn.
Exactly.
And if you're used to other camera systems that rotate the other way, you just flip it. Fantastic. He also says, will the Z8 support with its 2 USB-C ports a combination of the MC-N10 in one port and camera control to a DJI Ronin gimbal on the other one? So that would be 2 things camera controlling.
Yes. I don't believe so, because one is the data port and one's a power port.
Gotcha.
So we've split them.
Okay, so there is a specific USB port.
Yes, so on the side of the camera, it tells you which one's which.
Gotcha.
So on here, you see that the PD is for power and this one's for data. Of course. It tells you there. So probably be a no on that question.
That makes sense. But also, why would you want that? Because they do the same job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Right, we've covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground there. Is there anything else that you suddenly springs to mind of, oh no, we didn't mention that?
Good question. Good question. I think, have we spoken about the 3514 we have there?
We have, yes, with the flaring. And
exactly. Because I think those are really relevant to keep in mind. The 1.4 lenses
it was definitely
beautiful.
A question I had. Like, why is there a cheaper 1.4 versus a more expensive 1.8?
That's one thing I definitely wanted to cover, because no other brand does it like this. And also, we'd never used to do it like this. So in the DSLR world, we have the premium 1.4 and then the cheap 1.8 and nothing in between. Whereas now we have 2 lenses in between. Yeah. Because we've got, the 1.8 and the 1.4.
It's already made me itch to want to try out these 1.4.
Yeah, they're really, really nice. Really nice.
Yeah.
Really cool flaring. Sharp enough, but not too much. That is overly clinical. Yeah. But even for a lot of still shooters, I mean, I think they'll be very, very happy with those.
Absolutely.
But one thing I want to mention as well is we've spoken about how we have a lot of internal codecs and all of that stuff. The whole range of lenses is pretty much weather sealed as well. That's one thing I want to mention. So we don't put which lenses are weather sealed, because to be fair, most of them are. Mm-hmm. It's much easier for me to list the ones that aren't over the ones that are. Mm-hmm. A good way to tell is if it's got a plastic mount lens, it's not weather sealed. If it's got a metal mount, it is. Every single lens I've got here, bar 2 is. Mm-hmm. So it kind of gives you an indication of...
And presumably the 2 are the cheaper...
Yeah, so it's that
so there's
one
this one
and that one.
The kit
so
zoom,
actually, the smallest one is weather sealed to a certain degree. So, which is the 26 pancake that you've got there.
Oh yes, I can instantly feel that that's a plastic mount. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Sense.
Interesting thing you've got on there as well is you've got the first, because everyone thinks the 28-135 is the first power zoom. Actually, no.
This is a power zoom.
Yes, that is a power zoom. So that's the 12 to 28, and you can trigger that using the MC-N10.
That's your vlogging kind of lens, right?
Yeah. Fun fact though. Although it's a crop sensor APS-C lens designed for cameras like the Z50, we actually tested it on the Komodo X, and it works really well. Because it covers the sensor, and it can be used as a crash lens for those systems. If you want the cheap lens to put on it, that's going to give you wide angle in a power zoom segment that you can control remotely, because you can get your phone out, it can zoom in and zoom out, right, without actually having to be present. So it enables a lot of really powerful solutions for people.
Very cool. Okay, I think there is a lot to unpack there. I'm sure we will do a lot more streams in the future, going much more into detail with various things. If anyone's got any ideas of things that you would like to see us cover, absolutely let us know. This is only the start of the discussion, but thank you so much for your time.
No problem at all. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited. I can't wait to come back.
Any time. If you want to purchase any of this, of course, head over to ProAV. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all the comments. I'll see you very soon.